Hello everyone, this is Aripsuyas here, and today we're going to talk about using CORE, class restriction in CME, Cisco Manager Express. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the setup and put some context behind it before we talk about what CORE is and what it does. The first thing I want you to understand is that I have two phones that are each on their own router. So I have R2 VoIP and R1 VoIP. So this one means that it's on router 1, this means it's on router 2. I've already created dial pairs that allow them to communicate, so I know that they can communicate just fine, and let's quickly demonstrate that. Okay, so I have calling from R2 to R1, and let's see, can I reach the R2 phone? Okay, so the calls are working just fine. And before I explain more about CORE, I want to describe what I'm going to be trying to do here. So on the R2 phone, what I want to do is I want to make it so it can only call certain places. Okay, so class restriction or CORE is Cisco's way of stopping people from making calls you don't want them to make. So some examples might be you don't want an employee to dial some kind of 1-900 number. You don't want them to pay $5 a minute on company time to know their future, something like that. Maybe you don't want them to dial certain international numbers, right? Maybe it's too expensive. Just many reasons that certain phones don't have that. Maybe you have a phone that's kind of for your customers in the hotel lobby, and maybe that phone is only supposed to be able to dial hotel services and maybe 911. So as it is now, without CORE, that phone allows anybody to dial anywhere. So there's no restrictions. Now there's some implicit restrictions, you could say. Um, for example, with R2 phone, I mean, I only have routing now to the 7000 range. That's the only dial pair that I've made. So I guess you could always do it that way. But generally on routers, you're going to have dial pairs that would allow phones to get out to other places, right? So generally that means local calling, right? The local area code that you have where you live, and long distance, and maybe even international. So the problem becomes is if you have a phone on that router, nothing stops that phone from being able to dial any of those dial pairs. Okay, by default, there's nothing that stops it. So this is where CORE comes in. CORE is going to be able to restrict any phone number from dialing through a certain dial pair, but there's a few rules that have to be applied. Actually, there's really a 5-step process behind it. But the concept I want you to understand though is CORE blocks you from calling certain numbers if it is applied. By default on your CME router, there is no CORE. There's no restriction on anything. And to make it even more confusing, and Cisco talks about, there's a few rules behind it. One of those rules says that if you don't have an incoming CORE list refers to your phone number. So for example, on my 5777, I don't have any incoming CORE list. So if I don't have a CORE list, then it means nothing's going to be blocked. CORE list, at its essence, what you require is for an incoming CORE list and an outgoing CORE list. So I'm going to try and quickly explain that. Incoming CORE list applies to this phone number. Now, some people confuse that with meaning that it's referring to incoming calls to the phone. We're not doing that. We're not restricting what calls the phone can receive. We're restricting what calls the phone can make with CORE. So the way the CORE works is that once I pick up this phone, the moment that I pick up the phone off hook and say I want to dial somewhere, like this, okay, now that I've gone off hook, instantly my phone gets a list of CORE tags, okay, if there is a CORE list, and so it has an incoming CORE list. And that list will give me a list of tags or keys. So some examples of that might be that the CORE list that's associated with my phone here, the 5777, some tags might be 911. They might be local, they might be long distance, they might be internal extensions. Okay, it could be any of those or none of those, right? It might be 911 only, it might be internal extensions only, or maybe only local calling. So according to the tags that we define in CORE, we can really fine tune what it can call. Okay, and so the beauty of this is that it applies per phone number. So by doing that, different phones can have different ways of calling. Right, so we talked about a lobby phone. You can think in an organization there might be an employee who should call locally. There might be a manager, someone in sales who needs to kind of have unlimited calling privileges, right, to call almost any number, right, for different reasons. So that's where core comes in. Now the other part of it is there's an outgoing core list. Okay, the outgoing core list is applied to the dial peer. So think of it like this. Incoming core list applies to your DN, to your phone number, and the outgoing core list applies to a dial peer. But to make it even more confusing, you have to have a match of both. That means if I have an incoming core list that says I can only dial 911 and local and long distance, it doesn't do anything. There's no restriction applied on the outgoing dial peer. So on the dial peer, what you need to do, let's say I have a dial peer that will go out to local calling, okay? On that dial peer, I have to actually assign a core list there, an outgoing core list that says that you have to have the tag or the key called local, for example. So that means if this phone here, 5777, does not have that tag, then the call will be denied. But once again, though, there has to be the core list on the incoming side that specifies the tags that you do have, and there has to be an outgoing core list on each dial peer you want to apply that rule to. If you don't have an outgoing core list on the dial peer, then you don't have any restriction on that phone. So that's the basis of it. Okay, so now the question becomes, now that we have core, what seems to make it tricky for some people is how do we get those different numbers that we want to work with? So one of those numbers, obviously, we talked about is maybe calling 911. How do we call local, or maybe even long distance? How do we dial, 10-digit numbers? And where does that go to? Because most of you understand that, well, we're in a test environment. We have 2 virtual phones here, and we have a virtual router. And most of us probably don't have a SIP trunk that we can use as a dial peer to actually take us out there. And secondly, we wouldn't want to be calling the real 911 every minute, right? That's not a very good reason to call 911, and I think that you'd be in some hot water if you said, well, I'm just testing CME, or, I don't want to say I'm watching a video on YouTube here, so don't do that, even if you could, okay? So keep it in the internal test environment, in my environment too as well. These phones cannot get out. I'm on an internal network. These VMs have no internet access, so there's no way it can cause any harm to the network. And I advise you guys to have the same kind of setup as well, unless you're absolutely sure of what you're doing. It's also just nice not to have anything else interfering, right? When you have an internal network, you know that there's nothing else that can cause any issues, and everything's under your control at that point. So getting back to it though, I said that we want to restrict the R2 phone over here, which is 5777, and so it means the R1 phone is going to be the donor of our fake numbers, if you will, right? So I'm going to actually just assign 911 as a DN here, okay? So I'll assign 911 as a DN on R1, on the R1 phone. Okay, so let's go back here, DN2. Okay, and I'm going to say what number I want to give it. I want to give it 911. Another thing I want to do is I want to make another DN here, ephone-DN3 number. Now this is interesting, the wildcards. I'm going to reflect any 10-digit calling in North America by doing this. So I'm just going to do 3 dots. I can do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And that's going to reflect 10-digit calling in North America. Now, the next thing I need to do is go back to my ePhone. So ePhone 1, and I want to assign these, okay? So I'm going to say ePhone 1, button 2, right, which is this button here. I'm going to give it DN number 2, which is 911. Okay, like that. And then again on button 3, which is this button here, I'm going to give it DN3, which is the 10 dots. And that stands for the wildcard. Okay, so watch this. Okay, just restarting the phone. Okay, and look, we see that on button 2 I have 911, and I also have the 10-digit calling here. But on R2 I have to take care of that, okay? So I'm going to do conft telephone. Actually, don't even need to be in telephone. I'm just making some dial peers here. So dial peer voice 911 VoIP. Okay, so that's making the dial peer tag 911 and some type VoIP. So once again, if you guys recall in previous video, for dial peers, we need a destination pattern. Okay, destination pattern is literally going to be 911. We're just hard coding it. And then you need session, space target, IPv4. Okay, IPv4 192.168.5.1. And so that's the R1 router. We need one more thing though. We know how to get to 911 over there. The other question becomes this: how do we get to our 10-digit calling? So I'm going to make another one. I'm going to make a dial here, voice 500 VoIP, with a different destination pattern. Okay, this is going to be a little different. I'm just going to do 2-9. So this can be any number between a 2 and a 9, and a dot, which can be anything between a 0 and a 9, and then again a 2 and a 9. Okay, and then once again we need another 7-digit. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, and that should give us our 10-digit calling. So let's give it a shot here. First we'll call 911. Okay, so 911 works, good. And now we're going to call, let's say, give it to be a 416 number. Okay, good. So that also works. So we have now distinguished our dial peers. Okay, so hopefully you guys can see what we've done here. Basically, we're using our R2 VoIP phone as kind of the phone we want to experiment with CORE on. We're going to want to restrict it. Now you can see that generally this phone can dial anywhere. I mean, anywhere we've defined. It can dial the 7861 extension, can dial out to 911, and it can dial anything in North America. So it has pretty good privileges. So our goal here with CORE now is going to be to restrict that. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is define some CORE tags, and then apply it as an incoming list to this phone, and then apply outgoing CORE tags, CORE list as the outgoing on the dial peer for this phone on R2 router. So now it's time to actually make our CORE list. So at the core of it, not COR, but the core of what we need to do is we want to see, first of all, do we have any CORE lists? So we'll do a show dial peer CORE. So we have nothing there. Okay, totally empty, so that's good. That's how we want to start. You'd want to start with a blank CORE list, otherwise you could have some unexpected results. So it's good to have a clean and fresh start. Okay, so let's get going here. Okay, we're going to do a dial-peer CORE custom. And we're going to define just 2 tags. And the tags should always be sensible, everybody, okay? You should know what they're for. I'm going to kind of deviate and make it a little bit more simple. We're just going to have 2 restrictions today. Okay, so the first restriction we're going to call name 911. That is a tag. Okay, and think of the tag as kind of a permission. So we're calling this permission 911. I could call almost anything. I could call it like name ABC, right? It doesn't make any sense. So I'd actually say no name ABC. We don't want to mess up our core, all right? So don't do that. We also want to have a name called local, okay? And I'm kind of now defining local as 10-digit calling anywhere, and that's because a lot of VoIP providers actually, if you look at them today, they don't distinguish between sometimes calling anywhere in our country, even if it is long distance. Many SIP providers will actually charge you the same rate whether you call your home city or province or state, or across the country. So that's kind of interesting. But anyway, that's how I'm going to define it. But I do understand traditionally we would define anything outside of our area code generally as long distance. We're going to just define today the local calling based on that. Okay, so we have the 2 tags. Just remember that we have tags for 911 and local. Think of those as the permissions that we're going to define. We're now going to create CORE lists that are going to use those 2 there. Okay, so that's really the key that you want to keep in mind there. Okay, so let's get going. First, we will actually want to create the outgoing CORE list. Okay, it's not really super important which way we go in terms of the order. Okay, so I'm going to call this CORE list 911-out. Okay, so the syntax is dial-peer CORE space list, and this is the name of my list. I'm calling 911-out. The reason I'm doing the -out is to signify to me that this is going to be applied to the dial peer. Okay, and I mean the dial peer that handles 911 that we created earlier. Okay, so the same thing as well, we're going to make another one. Okay, I'm going to call it dial-peer local-out. Okay, so we have the two there. That's all we really care about, but actually there's a few things that, that we actually have to do. Okay, I'm going to go back to my first one. Notice that I did nothing with it. Okay, at the moment it's kind of like a normal dial here in the sense that there's nothing in it. So remember this, apply a membership to it. Well, what are our members? You saw above here I said name 911, okay, and local. So let's give it membership of 911, right? That signifies that to dial out through the core outgoing list that we call 911 out, you have to have the 911 tag. If you don't have that tag, you won't be able to call. But keep in mind, that's not actually what's happening at the moment. That's our goal. That's how we're planning this out. So you have to have a strategy in mind. And we understand here that we may want to restrict 911 calls or local calls. Obviously, in practice, though, you don't want to be restricting 911. But this is just an example. So we're going to go back to our other list here, or local out. Once again, I didn't give it a membership, okay? So I'm going to give it a member we defined above. Okay, what would that be? Well, I define local here. Okay, so member local. Okay, so great. We've now got our outgoing core list. Now we have to do our incoming. Okay, so it's really quite the same. Dial dash peer, okay, core list, 911 dash only. Now, the reason why I do 911 dash only, I suppose I don't have to put that, but it's good convention that, I think basically Cisco recommends, and that signifies that that incoming list will only allow me to dial 911. So it's important to be aware of that. That's why we put the only there. Okay, so if that's the case, then I have to give membership. Once again, the only members I created above are 911 and local. Obviously, I want to associate it with 911. It wouldn't make sense to associate with something else, right? For example, it would be very confusing if I gave it a name local. So once again, we can name almost anything. I could have called the member names anything. I could have called my list anything. But we're trying to be sensible here because it's very difficult to identify what's going on if you don't have sensible names. Okay, so I have defined the core list for incoming for 911. Now I need a core list for incoming for what? What if I want them to be able to call 911 and also local calls, which we define as kind of being tended to calling? Then I'm going to say 911-local. Okay, and we're building it out. You'll see what I mean by building it out now. So the first part 911, so I'm going to say a member of 911. What other member do I need to make this work? Right? If my intention is to allow this this person now who has this core list applied 911-local, I need to give it a member of local as well. See, there's a correspondence here, right? 911, 911, local, local. Now, this is how it works out. That's how I'm doing it. Technically, you could do it almost anyway, but I recommend you stick to this convention here to avoid any confusion and just to help it get working here. Okay, so we've done that. And now there's just a few steps left here. Okay, there's two things. So if you recall earlier, I mentioned that when you pick up your phone, when it goes off hook, you actually receive an incoming core list, okay? That means that your incoming core list is going to be assigned to a DN, which is the phone number. Okay, so we implement incoming core list on the phone number. Okay, so that's how we restrict it. We're restricting it on this side, but also the outgoing side, the dial here that would get you somewhere. So it's important to remember that if I apply my incoming core list, whatever that would be, I'm not restricting anything unless there's also an outgoing core list that has a restriction. Okay, so let's show that in practice here. Okay, so why don't I go here to, should I do the dial here? No, you know what? Yeah, let's do the dial here first. Okay, so I'm going to do dial here voice 911. Okay, and I'm going to do here, we'll give it here the core list for outgoing, say core list outgoing. Okay, and here's the thing where it gets tricky if you haven't followed along. I could apply anything here. It may end up still working, but it becomes very confusing. So let's do what I intend to do, which is that it should be 911-out, not 911-only. By default, it would probably work, right? It would work in this case, but let's not talk about that. It becomes very confusing if you're implying things or applying rules ambiguously here. Okay, so let's do that. Okay, and then at the same time, we also want to apply to our voice 500, right, which dials are 10 digit. We want to have a core list outgoing local dash out, because recall that we defined it up here. Okay, and we gave it member local. Now, let's just test it this, okay? Let's see. Did I restrict anything? Do you guys think I restricted it? On the outgoing now, I've applied those permissions. We also see that it required the tag for outgoing calls on local out to be the local tag. I haven't defined, or I haven't applied my incoming list. So let's see what happens. Can I still dial anywhere generally? Okay, so that is still working. Now can I dial a 10-digit number still? Okay, so that is still working. So as you can see, even though I applied outgoing, it's not restricting anything. So remember the rule from Cisco is that you have to do it on both sides. So although I have restriction of the outgoing dial here, there's nothing to restrict because I haven't actually given any restriction to my DN. It also works the opposite way. Okay, so if I give it just an incoming core list to my DN, and I don't have outgoing core list, it's not going to apply. So a lot of people are stumped by that. I guess they think by default, if you don't have a certain permission, it shouldn't allow you to. Cisco works kind of the opposite way, I guess, where if you're not restricted explicitly, then it's assumed you have permission. So the only way to make the core work is just remember this, that you have to apply a core list on the outgoing side, which means dial peer. That's why we have core list here that we're calling out, right? 911-out and local-out. So how about the ones that don't say out? That means we're talking about incoming. Okay, so let's apply that on our DN here. Okay, let's go ephone DN1. Okay, and now let's apply in core list. Typing it wrong again. Core list incoming 911 dash only. Now it doesn't work. Uh-oh, it doesn't work. Okay, so what's happening is that I have the incoming core list of 911. So I finally applied it actually to my DN here, guys. Okay, so I gave it a membership of 911, right? 911 dash only gives me the tag of 911. Okay, so hopefully that makes a little bit of sense here. Now to take it further, the way I built it out, remember I also have a 911 dash local. Okay, so I can change it up here. All right, you can change it on the fly. There's no need to restart. It applies right away. Okay, so if you look here, dial-peer core list 911-local, look at the membership that I gave it. I gave it 911 and local. Okay, and then look at the outgoing side of it. Local out requires the member local. So that's now going to match, I think. Okay, let's see what happens. Okay, now the call is permitted. So hopefully you can see now that it's all about matching the incoming and outgoing core list, okay? And you can't have one without the other. You know, some people think that they should just be able to do the outgoing and that's going to work. It would everything be denied by default. No, it actually means that if you don't have an incoming core list, that by default you have no restriction. So you have to have both applied. Okay, so hopefully that makes a lot more sense. And so that's really the basis of it. Now, one other thing you can do as well, you might want to see what you have here, right? You can always show your core list, right? You can do show dial dash pure core if you want to see what you have, right? Now I made it easy by just showing you above here. If this helps you, then you can also see here. So under class restriction, I just have two tags, okay? 911 and local, and I define these at the beginning, right? Just by doing dial dash pure core custom, okay, and then saying name 911 and name local, okay, and then again, see, you know, at the time these core lists, they were just a core list, okay. It could be used for incoming or outgoing, but we define that later on, right? Like for example, up here on the DN, right? I chose to say core list incoming 911 dash only, okay. You could also do the dash L, but trust me, it becomes very murky and very confusing in the real world when you have things like different departments. So don't do a hack job, actually explicitly define it, and that's what we're doing here, right? We have an outgoing core list for 911, we have an outgoing core list for local calling, we also have an incoming list for 911 only, and we have an incoming list for 911 local. So just to wrap it up really quick, remember this, okay, that the only and local ones, okay, are for incoming. So the way that we identify, right, because it's really hard to understand if you have a million core list here. Anything with dash out or maybe dash call should be applied to the outgoing. Outgoing means dial peer, and remember once again that incoming means DN, it means phone number. So some people think that for incoming means incoming call. No, literally means incoming core list. Once again, is when you pick up this phone off hook, the incoming core list is going to be one of these, but that's only if we assign it, right? So you saw up here, I assigned incoming core list at 911 dash only. At that time, I could only call 911. Then I decided I want to have more privileges. Okay, so I changed that core list on that DN here to 911 dash local. So that's pretty much all there is to core. At a very simple level, right? You can make endless amounts of rules, but I hope this helps you to secure your CME router and stop people from making those 1-900 calls that are costing you a fortune. So thank you for watching, and please like, share, and subscribe, and see you guys.